CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Team, and it was actually begun in Memphis in the 80s. And it began because oftentimes in mental health, things happen because of tragedy. And the same thing happened here. There was an individual who was actually shot and killed by the police in Memphis. I believe it was 1987. And he was in a mental health crisis, and his mother called because he was in a mental health crisis. And from there was quite a bit of community outrage. And it just so happened that they had a pretty strong NAMI there. It was run by mothers who also had sons living with mental illness, who had interacted with law enforcement at the time. And they worked with the local county and the sheriff's department to agree to create a training specifically tailored to law enforcement to interact with individuals with mental illness during times of crisis. So CIT is not only, they always say that the little tagline is it's not just a training. The CIT team, it's really important to know that it's not just a training, it's a mentality and a way to operate with law enforcement to respond to individuals who are in mental health crises in the most appropriate way, both for the safety of them, but also for the individual, the family, and for law enforcement, for the officers. The studies show that law enforcement has less injuries. They have less use of force calls when they implement crisis intervention team model. And, from the sheriff's office perspective, again, you can articulate it a different way, but.
And basically, like you were saying, it's a collaborative effort between law enforcement and mental health providers and community organizations, nonprofits, community leaders, other government agencies. It's a working together for a common goal to better the community, and especially for those with mental health issues or substance abuse issues.
You got to figure, so if you're having a mental health crisis, you're statistically more likely to come in contact with law enforcement over any other service provider first in a mental health crisis. Really think about that. And I always say, in working with law enforcement, it's not their fault. I mean, law enforcement's not sitting around saying, "Hey, let's encounter more individuals with mental health crises." I think most of the individuals that I've spoken with in the years that I've worked with law enforcement got into the field they're in to help people. The same reason I got into this field, right? They wanted to make their community better, and they wanted to help people. Now, I think that most went in with the thought that they're going to catch bad guys, certainly not thinking that they're going to interact with people who are in particular crises. But again, more likely to come in contact with law enforcement on mental health crises. That speaks to our mental health system, that speaks to our society. And it took tragedy, but it also took the willingness of law enforcement to step in, because they don't get to say, "Oh, nope, sorry, I'm not taking this person today." They're there, they have to interact, they have to do something about it. So as an advocate, as I see it, where I sit, I commend law enforcement for not turning their back when many other parts of the system have, but for going all in and saying, "All right, well, we're going to embrace this and we're going to try and do the very best that we can."
It started actually with dealing with the high number of suicides that were very predominant in our community, and trying to address that need, trying to figure out why and how we could change that. And then as time went on and people were brought into the discussion, we realized that it wasn't just suicides, that there were other issues within the community dealing with mental health and substance abuse. So I guess the target kind of morphed to include those issues, and the need for a CIT team was discussed and brought forward.
Again, I was only in my late 20s when I tried to advocate, in probably not the most appropriate way, for law enforcement training. And there were other things that were happening in our community at the time. You've also got to consider that Judge Garcia started our first behavioral health court in 2011. So these things are not happening in a vacuum. You can't just look at, oh, well, law enforcement decided to do this training. As the major had indicated earlier, one of the things that started this, again, there was a long, drawn-out process to working together and coming together. I don't know that if the current sheriff were elected back, years before, that necessarily it would have happened. I think there's a combination of things that were happening in our community I think there were also relationships that were being built that allowed each other to trust one another to put this training together, because that's what it comes down to. I mean, the sheriff's department allowed NAMI to come in and do a training with their officers who are working on the street. Think about that. That's a pretty big deal. So that didn't just happen. That happened over a period of time because trust was built, and there were things that were happening in our community that affected this. So I guess to answer the question, how do I know it's the right time? Well, one thing that's, as we noted earlier, was pretty obvious, is the sheriff agreed to do it in public forums. And realistically, sheriffs are elected officials just like judges and many other people. So I would say to mental health advocates, one of the things that we've always done is we try to always make mental health a topic, not only in political forums, but really at any chance that we can get, because that's what our job is as mental health advocates. So we happen to have the right person come in as the sheriff. We happen to have the right people working at the sheriff's department, and we happen to have the right community and the right people invested, educated, and interested in order to make this happen. We actually internally developed what we called a behavioral health training, which is a 2-day training, working alongside with the sheriff's department and other mental health providers. And we definitely learned some stuff. I can tell you going in, I mean, the first one 15? Or
Yes.
Somewhere in there, yeah. So they allowed us to do a training, and the first mistake that was made was they still talk about it, I'm not naming names. I got an attorney that might have ruffled some feathers and made some waves, but it's still talked about to this day. But what I did take from that is it was our first real introduction to being around law enforcement for an extended period of time. Like, we were used to interacting on the street, but to see them all around each other and to see the information, to get the feedback, and just to see the honesty was really refreshing for us as advocates. And I can definitely say our relationship as an advocates in mental health has grown, and it's had to grow. We've had to learn each other. We've had to learn. I've learned a lot about why certain things are done, and I think that's what all this kind of comes down to, is the why. I think if we understand the why behind things and we meet people as people, we tend to find that people in this community are good people in general, and we're really mostly here to try and make it better. But we have access to different information, we have access to different experiences and resources. So when we come together and talk about these things, I think it goes a long way towards moving forward together. So anyway, I remember this. I'll tell you what, I met him. So we did it was our second or third 2-day training, and I knew they were invested because they allowed us to have another one. And then there was this guy in a white shirt, and I didn't know the difference, right? So you got all the other people, and there's a guy in a white shirt, and he's sitting in the back, but paying attention. He's paying attention. And everybody's coming up to him, I'm talking. I'm like, well, he's got to be important. I don't know. Nice guy. And that's when I found that it seemed as though they were sending him in to vet the program, the 2-day program, which, we got good feedback from Major. And then from there, we, as noted, when the sheriff, the current sheriff, when Sheriff Smith was campaigning, he, the community talked about CIT, and he committed to it. And to his credit, his inauguration was in January, he takes office in July, and it was myself, a judge, parish attorney, and the Human Services Authority director. We all traveled to San Antonio together. We set that up. He agreed to do it, and which I thought was, how's the sheriff going to agree to go with a judge and all these other people to another state to check out a law enforcement training, But he did, and we went there, and he went riding along, and I could tell he was interested in it. He went riding along the next day. He comes back. He's like, "We're doing it. I'm all in." And just law enforcement, talking to law enforcement, and seeing not only the change that the way that you can treat people in the community differently for such a low investment, really, but also the safety to his officers. That's a big selling point, because, again, if you don't have to wrestle on the ground with somebody, I imagine everybody wins, right? If we can end things peacefully, but still maintain obviously the safety for both the officers, the community, and the individual involved, that's the end goal, right? We all just want to, end things peacefully. So that's kind of my long rambling CIT story, but it's been a fun ride, I can tell you that. Again, going from aggravating the heck out of some rank at the sheriff's department to being honored enough to sit and interview CIT officers that come in. I can tell you from my perspective, from an advocate's perspective, if anybody, for those of you that are listening on this, we need to listen more, I think. And we really don't know what a day in the life of a law enforcement officer is, especially in these times. It's a difficult position. They are challenged every day. Just as the people living with mental illness not being able to access services, they're challenged every day. So I hope that, for the advocates or people that want to change things, the way to change things is, yeah, I can say my aggravating changed things, but it didn't. It was the willingness to listen and hear the needs both of law enforcement and to see the needs of the community and convene. I mean, that's what this is all about, right? He's talking about we got together. It's all about meeting each other and convening and, offering up solutions together to improve the community. So I have to kind of stop and, as a side, I know for me, I have a quick story that I tell that kind of launched me into the judicial system, which also made me more comfortable in working with law enforcement. Because again, I'm a mental health guy, right? Like, what experience do I have in the legal system or in the law enforcement system? And I was in my late 20s, and I remember I got a phone call from someone on the other end, and they're like, is this Nick Richard, by the way? Yes, sir. And he says, Peter Garcia. I'm like, the judge? Yes. Well, I'd like to meet with you. And that's kind of a scary proposition for a 20-something-year-old to have a judge call you. And we went in and met, and he wanted to start a mental health court in this community because he, as I learned over the years, he had started one of the first drug courts in the state in 1998. And from there, really began to build this culture in the courthouse of helping and volunteering time. And I knew a little bit about him just from being here, but I will say that from there, he got us involved in what's called the sequential intercept model and sequential intercept mapping, which makes you look at your system and look at where individuals are going to come in contact with law enforcement or they're going to come in contact with the system. And what I mean by those individuals living with mental illness. And he would always joke, he'd always say, zero intercept. That's why, which is a zero intercept means we don't have to reach the criminal justice system. That means we have a robust mental health system that has adequately met the needs of the individuals, so we're not having to defer to law enforcement to deal with that crisis. But having him involved, I think, in so many different ways, not only as a judge, but he also received our national organization's Sam Cochran Award. Sam Cochran was, referred to as the godfather of CIT. He not only created mental health court, but he was instrumental in working with the sheriff, the judges, and other elected officials and other systems in bringing wide-scale change to the way that our community dealt with people living with mental illness and also dealt with mental health crises. So for me, anytime I talk about criminal justice and law enforcement, I have to, give a shout out. And the judge, unfortunately, we lost him right about a year ago. He passed away, but the lessons that we learned and the information that he brought forward while we miss his presence, I think for me and for many of us, we move forward with the spirit that he brought and the humor as well, but really the passion towards making the community a better place.
It's going to take a commitment from law enforcement, from local nonprofits, from community leaders, from local politicians. Everybody has to be bought in. It's not something that just one organization can do by themselves. It has to take community partnership.
It's actually an evidence-based course. It's a 40-hour training, so it's intensive, right? So you've got 40 hours of training, not only, and the instructors are varied. So you have instructors who are law enforcement, you have instructors who are licensed mental health professionals, you have instructors that work in the school system, you have instructors that work in the emergency rooms, and then you have instructors who are family members and who are people living with mental illness. The intent is not only to educate by way of giving information and giving skills, but it's also to humanize people living with mental illness and to have them hear the perspective, not all negative either. There are some positive stories that are involved in the training Individuals who are instructors are certified, so both Major Muller and myself are both certified CIT instructors. On top of that, we're actually certified CIT coordinators. So we've gone through several days at this point, probably weeks worth of training, over the last decade in order to deliver appropriate mental health training. So again, the neat thing is that it's not only instructor type training, but you also have hands-on. They go through role plays. The officers have the ability to take the information that they learn and then apply it in a role-playing scenario where the instructors, the role players are instructors themselves. So when an individual is going against what CIT teaches to de-escalate, the individual will kind of amp it up a little bit. So you get to really practically see the information applied in front of you.
And one of the other things that I like about CIT training is that it can be tailored to your local community. A lot of training for law enforcement is kind of a standard canned training that, is generic to your area, I guess, but it's they teach it nationwide or internationally, and it's the same. Well, those things don't always work 100% in your community. So CIT, by bringing in your community leaders and providers and dealing with what goes on in your community and structuring the 40-hour course to include that, it helps teach the officers what resources are available in their community, and it helps address specific issues that are in your community that may not be the same as if you were dealing with something in Nebraska or Hawaii or something else. What's unique to Louisiana, you can tailor the training to fit those needs.
Yeah, and one of the things we always start off with in the training, especially not being in law enforcement, right? So I don't carry a weapon. My job is not to protect the community. It's not to, I don't have to consider the things that law enforcement has to consider. So when I'm involved with the training, I also know, and that's why, we're here together because, how long you been? How many years?
In
like 60 years or
in
something?
law enforcement
Yeah.
since 1989.
1989. So he's been in law enforcement there's no way that I can in any way, shape, or form understand the thoughts and pressures and what he's been through and being in that role. And I recognize that as a mental health advocate, and we're really upfront about that. The other thing that we always tell the officers before we start is, look, we're just here to teach some skills, some tools to put in your tool belt. Once safety becomes an issue, what we're teaching you is out of the window. You need to defer back to your training that they're required to do by state statutes. So again, this is a specialty area. There are special skills that are used that can be applied to many different situations, but this is not to take place of law enforcement training that they already received to work on the road, but it's to enhance the skills and abilities of individuals who come in contact with individuals who are in mental health crisis.
Because they didn't fully appreciate why they were there. Because just like I was voluntold in the beginning, they were kind of voluntold too. But once they started participating, they began to understand and could appreciate how this could mix in with law enforcement. And, so kind of answer your question, it's in some ways kind of kicking and screaming with law enforcement because safety is a huge concern. And a lot of times they don't understand that CIT does not mean giving up safety of yourself or the individual that you're responding to a crisis with. So once you can get them to buy into that, and once you can get them to understand that you're not trying to take away what their job description is, that you're only trying to give them additional skills to help them do their job better and to make it home safe at the end of the day. And, for the person that called that's in crisis too, you want to help them, and to understand that, CIT doesn't disregard any laws that were violated or anything else like that. If there's something criminal that occurs, those things still have to be dealt with. But that doesn't mean that you don't try and provide them with help and assistance and resources and to try and prevent whatever occurred from occurring again. And we do have options as law enforcement. Just because a law was violated, it doesn't mean that you have to go to jail. Now, sometimes that is taken away from us by law. We have to, take somebody into custody. But other times we may be able to issue a summons, or the whatever the offense occurred was minor enough that the other person doesn't want to pursue charges or something. And then instead of just going away, if the person is in some sort of crisis or needs assistance, then through CIT and the training that we receive, then we can help get them in touch with the resources or get them connected to the help that they may need.
I will say with any relationship, communication is key. And I think being open and honest and understanding the roles and responsibilities are key. But at the end of the day, the people that are involved are there for the right reasons. They're not there to, make some kind of name or career for themselves. They're honestly simply there to make the community a better place. And when you start with that mentality and you start with that intent, it's pretty easy to develop a working relationship.
It has enlightened me to the struggles that people go through. It was something that was never really too close to me. I had, distant relatives that had mental health issues, and it was something that I didn't really know how prevalent it was. It has definitely enlightened me to how prevalent and how serious of an issue it is, and how much help these people really need.
That's a big question. So the mental health community, and that's broken up into many different parts of the community. So, I'll speak from NAMI's perspective, and then I'll speak from mental health professionals' perspective, and then we can look at the medical community as well. Really, I'll state this: the people that lose the most sometimes are law enforcement. Right? The biggest gainers of this are the mental health community, because, like I said, quite often, if the mental health community, and I'm a part of it. If the mental health community was providing everything they needed to provide, we wouldn't see this level and amount of crisis in our community that would warrant a specific training for first responders. So on that hand, the mental health system needs to do a better job of providing for its clients and the family members of its clients. And back to what I said about law enforcement losing the most is, there obviously, the major can talk about the gains in the training, and then there's obviously some positive behind the statistics, keeping officers safe and all that, but they're having to give more than the other systems, if that makes sense, right? So the mental health system, what do they have to really do? They have to show up maybe for the training. That's it. That's their commitment to this, right? What do mental health advocates? What do we have to do? We have to help convene, show up to some meetings, right, to help this training go along. But look at the gain. The gain is there's less people who are becoming so ill that no one's intervening, and that is going to shorten their lifespan. That's just a fact. The longer you go without a treatment for any illness, especially one that is chronic and can be debilitating, the longer you go without treatment, the lower your ceiling is going to be, and the shorter your lifespan is going to be. So CIT literally saves lives, and so it. On the one hand, it's hard to answer that question of what's the gain? The gain is lives, and I think that's the end of the conversation. When you can de-escalate a crisis and get someone to the most appropriate place, you are lengthening that person's life.
It helps with officer safety by teaching the officers de-escalation techniques. So it helps them, I like to refer to it as the gift of gab sometimes. It helps them to be able to talk through a situation more so than using force or direct commands. Obviously those are important at times, but not all the time. Not everybody needs to be spoken to in a stern voice or in a direct commanding manner. So it's knowing when to use certain tones and conversation. So that's one of the things that they learn is to help with officer safety. Also, they learn different techniques as far as how to stand, how to approach people that are going through crisis, how to not buy into the crisis that somebody's experiencing. An inexperienced officer, if they go out to a call where maybe somebody is having, hallucinations, a non-trained officer may buy into it. And if somebody says, "Oh, don't you see the people outside on the my back porch," when there's nobody there may be an officer, "Oh yeah, I see," or they may, I don't want to say make fun of the situation, but they may jokingly come back with a comment that may not be received well by that person, and CIT training helps them learn how to respond and how to avoid getting caught up into the person's crisis.
I think, like anything else, we're honest about what we know and what we don't know. We also, to some extent, we all try to stay in our own lanes. What I mean by that is when it comes down to a decision that's made by law enforcement, that's more of what we would consider a tactical law enforcement decision. I don't have enough information or education or experience in that to really weigh in. If I weigh in, it's simply a question. So I think that's really important, is understanding the roles and responsibilities of each party that's involved. And look, we don't agree all the time. There are things that we want to see that don't happen for whatever reason, but there's a level of respect there for us to have a discussion and understand why certain things can't happen. There's often many factors that help something happen, but there's also many factors that stop things from happening.
Major changes as far as, well, I'd say attitude with law enforcement officers as they've begun to understand what CIT is about. I've noticed a change in attitude, kind of what I alluded to earlier. Not every officer understood it. Not every officer necessarily wanted to participate, but once they get to see it work and not just learn about it, then sometimes you notice that their attitude changes. That it's kind of like an aha moment or whatever, that they start to accept it and then realize that you're not trying to teach them how to police differently, so to speak. It's just an addition to the skills that they already have, and helping present a different way of looking at things. I've noticed interest in the community. The deputies, on the deputy side of it, I've noticed that with CIT we have become more community aware, I guess, in certain things, and there's more of an acceptance or wanting to participate. We have deputies a lot more that are wanting to go, like when NAMI has NAMI Walk, fundraisers. They want to participate in the fundraisers. They're looking for ways to volunteer and help give back in the community. And I attribute some of that to the CIT program, that has helped open their eyes to the needs in the community that the organizations have. We know some of them that are there. We don't know all of them, so we've learned that there are a lot more that exist in our community. But I guess because they operate in the background to us a lot of times, we don't always realize the struggles that they have. So CIT has helped us realize their needs and their goals, and deputies have been able to participate in that. I would also say the community has had a better appreciation for what we do, as well as the providers and agencies. They get to see a different side of us, and they get to see the willingness to maybe not do everything that's suggested, but at least listen. And if it's something that we can't do, maybe have a conversation where we can, explain why. It's maybe not that we don't think it's a good idea, but maybe explain, why, that we can't do something a certain way, and there's an appreciation there. But those are some of the things that I've noticed with CIT, and it's just helped us, in my opinion, become a better community. Now, I think goals on my side is I'd like to see it grow. I would like to, see us get further as far as the formal CIT team. Because I guess one of the things I had to learn also when we were going through this process is we have a formal CIT team, and they respond to those types of calls. But CIT is not just those deputies that are a part of that team. CIT is a whole mindset. It's a whole way of doing business, so to speak. So I would like to see more deputies trained in CIT, more deputies trained in mental health first aid and autism awareness. I would like to see more deputies and law enforcement in general receive that type of training so that way they can better serve the community. And kind of like Nick was saying, I mean, none of us want to use force. We'd love to be able to go out, and if somebody's got to go to jail, say, hey, I hate to do it, but you got to go to jail. And they get in the car and everything's great, and we go from there. But in the real world, that doesn't happen that way, and sometimes you have to use force. But we as law enforcement weren't always the best at finding that middle ground or the options, still having the same end goal that, this person's going to go to jail or this person's going to go to the hospital or whatever. We were too focused on the end and not necessarily on what we could do in between to get there, and maybe spend a little bit more time, maybe talk a little different, maybe explore some options that didn't compromise safety, but would end up achieving the same end goal without having to use force. But so moving forward, I would like to see us expand. I would like to see the community, not just here locally, but nationally, support mental health and getting programs started. I think St. Tammany's pretty fortunate, and I think we do have a lot of support here. So it's hard for me to speak about what's missing here, because I think we're a lot better off than some areas. But I would definitely like to see the programs grow, the resources come aboard. I just think that there's so much more we can do, going forward, and it's going to do nothing but benefit, law enforcement and the community as a whole.
My goal would be to not have to need CIT, right? I mean, if we had an adequate mental health system and we had more funding that was put into not only researching mental illness, but also addressing individuals and getting them the services they need before there's a crisis, then we can all go back to our merry ways. As much as I love working with law enforcement, I'd love for them to be out there catching bad guys and doing that.
And we can get together for golf.
That's right. We can always do that, right? But that's the goal, right? That's the goal of NAMI is to help provide the resources of the needed resources to individuals in a mental health crisis and the support and education that they need as well. So maybe it's a unrealistic goal, but the goal is to not have to use law enforcement for medical conditions in general. It's great to have them there, and I think there'll always be some need for CIT training. So, then on the realistic side, what's our goal? Because that's obviously a big long-term goal. I side with the major. I'd love to see more training because, like you said, it's not just the training, it's not just the team, it's this mentality behind it. It's this culture that is built behind that. I've seen change here just in the years that CIT's been here. In 5 years now, huh? Yeah. It'll be 5 years in July, yeah. In the 5 years, it feels like it's been longer, but it also feels like it was just yesterday. I don't know how to describe that, but I'd love to see the growth there because, as the major said, it changes the culture. It just changes the way that we interact with people in the community. I can tell you now, the phone calls that we get, it's interesting. So if you go back 5 years, and we all did some press. We did some outreach and awareness to let the community know about a CIT team. And there were some people that were skeptical about it, but they were happy about it, especially family members, because think about being a mother, right, or father, and you've got your adult child who has severe mental illness, who sometimes is in crisis no matter what you do, and the fear that you have not only for your child, but you don't know what you're going to get. And this is no offense to law enforcement, but if you call, you don't know what to tell people, right? You just want to get help for your child. You don't want to have to involve law enforcement. You don't have to involve the hospital. You don't have to involve anybody, really. You just want your child to be better. But the only mechanism that our community gives you is to call law enforcement out. And then you don't know what's going to happen, right? What happens if they get handcuffed, or what happens if they get hurt or killed? Like, that's a real concern. And that's not against law enforcement. That's against the mental health system for putting law enforcement and people with mental illness in this position, because they don't know what they're walking up on. They're coming to a house, they know there's a disturbance, right? They don't know if there are weapons. They don't know if someone's going to harm them or someone else or the neighbor or the mother or father. They don't know any of that, and their job is to protect the community and obviously get back home themselves. So we're putting people in positions to create problems, and I don't think that this is the way that we should deliver mental health services. Having said all that, I do think that obviously expanding the training into other departments, maybe corrections, courthouse, and some of these other departments to build the culture there, to me would be the goal. It would be really neat and maybe impractical, I don't know, because I don't work for the sheriff's department, but it would be really neat to at least see, maybe smaller, but CIT teams kind of in all of these areas. Because look, just as I imagine, not everybody's geared to be a SWAT officer, not everybody's geared to be a CIT officer. So again, there have been questions about CIT for all, and I'm opposed to that because, again, if it's not something you buy into, you can't make people buy into mental health de-escalation training if they're just not apt to doing it, just like you can't make someone a SWAT officer if they're just not built to do that. So anyway, long rambling answer as always, increasing, and really seeing teams in these other departments would be an ultimate goal here.
I hope it grows. I hope it gets to the point where we are the leader in the area, and everybody comes to us for guidance on how to create one and how to start one and how to maintain one.
The real question is how many effective and properly functioning CIT departments are in the state. I will say that this parish, which certainly not the first. There were, I know, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, Lafayette, Jefferson Parish has been real active. I believe there's some areas, I know Ruston has done some things. I believe there's some other areas in the northern part of the state that have been active. But, I can honestly say that St. Tammany was certainly not the first parish or community in Louisiana to be involved in this. But I think there's other things that we have as a community that make it easier and also make it harder, right? So this district, this community has more helping courts or specialty courts than any other district in the state of Louisiana. So it's there's also pressure put there, right? You've got 12 judges that decide to volunteer their time in specialty courts who are elected officials, and so it's hard for other elected officials not to take that notice. So there's a culture here. I think the major alluded to earlier. There's a culture here, and a lot of it's due to Hurricane Katrina. It's due to the devastation of the mental health system, the higher suicide rate, the increases there, and then from there the closure of our state hospital, which was a core agency in this community. So I don't know, to answer the question, there's a good handful of CIT, but I will also tell you that the St. Tammany Sheriff's Department has always been open since day one at hosting other departments. At this point, they've been the hub. They've accepted people from all the surrounding parishes, including Tangipahoa, Washington, St. Helena, and Livingston. In addition to that, we've had FBI crisis negotiators there, and have, I believe, even hosted, you have to ask the major this, hosted people from out of state as well. So one of the things I like is in the spirit of collaboration, not just locally, but in the spirit of collaboration with other law enforcement agencies, the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Department is open and willing to accept individuals who have need in other parts of the state, because we're all brothers and sisters. I mean, we're all from Louisiana. We're all here to help, members of our community. So, and I can also state to this, we've learned from other areas too. We haven't perfected anything yet. We all rely on each other, and if we're all open and willing to work with each other, then, we're all open and willing to get better and help more people.
COVID has definitely created an issue. I think at one point in time we were moving along at a pretty good speed and everything was coming together. And then COVID came and everything kind of came to a screeching halt. CIT training is an in-person training. It's 40 hours and there's a lot of scenarios and role playing and just interacting in a close environment. So CIT training basically had to come to a halt until we could get a handle on the pandemic and until some restrictions started to open up. So that kind of put us behind the 8 ball, I guess, for, lack of better words, that we've had to cut back on that training or basically stop it at this point. We have actually, in April, we are hoping to, or I'm sorry, not April, in June, we are hoping to hold our first CIT training since COVID came. We also offer mental health first aid training for our officers, and that got delayed also because when COVID first hit, I guess nobody was expecting something like this to happen. So that training was an in-person training also. So the organization that owns the rights to mental health first aid, or that developed it, they had to restructure their training so that way it could be delivered in a different format, whether it be, some virtual and some in person or all virtual. And then once that was done, our instructors had to go through a certification to be able to teach the new format. So that delayed training. It's really made things different, and we're still learning and trying to figure our way through it. But we have started doing virtual mental health first aid training, and we look forward to getting back to in person to where we can do the CIT training. I think, and one of the things also that's interesting with CIT, it's not the tools that you receive from going through the training. You use it all day long in your job. It's not just on crisis calls. A lot of what you learn and just looking at something a little bit differently can help you do a lot of the things in your job better. And it's kind of rewarding for me to see the officers that are basically brought into the training kicking and screaming. Once they get out and actually try it and use it and see a positive result, then come back to you and kind of let you know that, hey, this really works. Hey, this is, and I'm not saying it's going to work every situation. There's sometimes, or you may not have the opportunity because things are unfolding so quick to do some of the things that you've been trained, and you have to resort to, the safety side of it. But just to see the change in somebody that's been policing for a long period of time, or somebody that's new that has a different idea of policing, but once they go through the training and then actually apply the skills on the street to see how things work a little bit different, it's rewarding. And kind of like what Nick said, one of the, with officers not knowing what they're responding to, they're in our community. We become familiar with people in our community, so they're, a majority of the times we may be dealing with somebody that we've dealt with before, and we kind of, have a little playbook as to what works, what doesn't work, or what we're going into. But imagine somebody that has a child with some sort of mental illness, or that moves into a community, and then they have a crisis situation, and this is their first time calling law enforcement, and they may have came from a community that didn't have a CIT program or didn't have a strong, provider or resource assistance for mental illness, and they don't know what to tell the dispatcher when they're calling, or they don't know what to tell the officer. And, you know, the officers show up, they don't know what they're dealing with. I mean, we don't get a briefing necessarily of what we're going to see. A lot of it is you get a quick call and you show up and then you got to sort it out real quick. So, I mean, it's valuable training for that, and it definitely helps make a difference.
Yeah, we get a lot of phone calls from family members, especially. And I was kind of talking about that earlier. I didn't really dive into it too deeply, but a big part of the trainings that we do for family members, education classes, and for people living with illness and the support groups, and the phone calls that we answer, we direct to the CIT team now. Which, again, on the one hand, I'm like, I kind of hate that we have to, right? But on the other hand, I'm grateful to have the resource, because I also know these family members come to us, we're a trusted resource. So if we're referring someone to something, we've got to have no doubt that it is going to be what people need. So it's great to have a team of people that we know we can say, hey, you know, oh yeah, Deputy Moss, or I don't remember Madison's last name. Barbin. Deputy Barbin is in that area, you know, call in and this is what you say, and, you know, this is the information that dispatch is going to need to hear and all that. So it's this, you know, I can tell you as a referral agency and as an advocate, there's this comfort in knowing that we have people who I know are going to do the very best they can in the situation. And I have no doubt that there have been countless times that they have de-escalated a situation that maybe otherwise would have gone a different route. In our community, saving not only, I mean, think about the trauma that's involved with that, right? You know, you're already in a mental health crisis. I mean, good Lord, right? So you're already having to deal with that 9 times out of 10 because you couldn't get access to appropriate services. And now, you know, you're handcuffed. But because of the training and because of the willingness of the sheriff's office, I think that happens a lot less than it did in the past.
And the relationship that's grown out of this, I mean, your organization, you know, can pick up the phone and call Deputy Barbin or call Deputy Moss or say, hey, you know, we had somebody reach out to us and they're needing some assistance or whatever. And we have that personal relationship to where we can, you know, exchange information comfortably and you know, share our resources together. And the same thing, you know, our officers, they don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call NAMI. You know, and say, hey, what, you know, I'm going to this, what can you do? Or can you give me, you know, some idea, or I'm on scene somewhere and this person's looking for this. I mean, it's a great relationship that's developed, and it does nothing but benefit the community.
Hope is healing, recovery is possible, and lives are improved when people are given the right opportunities and resources.